Hello, dear authors and invited guests. So, as we are from different time zones, I would like to greet you good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 5th International Conference on Smart Trends in Computing and Communications through Zoom on behalf of SmartCom 2021 and the Global Knowledge Research Foundation. As every one of us is passing through unseen circumstances due to COVID-19, we wish everyone and their families a protected time, and we all will together pass this soon. Okay. We are thankful to all present on this platform to join us digitally for the conference in these unpredictable times and make this conference more fruitful in the terms of technical knowledge, and hope you will enjoy the 2 days of knowledgeful and interactive sessions. I would like to welcome you to the technical session 1B and further introduce you all to the chair for this session, Dr. Gul Erkol Bayram. Dr. Gul is the associate professor in the School of Tourism and Hotel Management, Department of Tour Guiding at the University of Sinop, where she has been a faculty member since 2016. She is also head of tour guiding department. Dr. Gul Erkol Bayram completed her PhD at Sakraya University and her undergraduate studies at Balikesir University. She has been also a professional tour guide for 10 years. Her research interests lay in the area of tourism management and policy and planning, organizational behavior, and tour guiding, etc. So, thank you, Dr. Gul, for being chair of this session and giving me the chance to introduce your profile.
Yes. Many thanks, ma'am, for your kind words. Firstly, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to our session of the fifth International Conference on Smart Trends in Computing and Communications. I'm Dr. Gül Erkol Bayram from University of Sinop in Turkey, and I will be chairing this session. I would like to firstly thank to all team members in organizing for inviting me to chair this session. Everything has changed since it affected human lives, the family atmosphere, and the piece of social and economic development, and all of which have resulted in uncalculable loss of sustainable development. Still, there is no agreement about how ICT and communication can help unify cross-country differences. The COVID-19 pandemic has stressed every country's social, environmental, and economic indicators and has challenges how nations can continue their sustainability and development. At the peak of the crisis, governments warned people to stay at home. In the time of the crisis, such as the current COVID-19, and its economic and social repercussions, public governance matters more than ever. ICT arrangements have played a critical role in countries' immediate responses and will continue to be crucial both to the recovery and to building a new normal once the crisis has passed. I am continuing with my phone. At least for the foreseeable future, face-to-face interactions will be simply impossible. Restrictions, long quarantine times, and hygiene risks still hamper in many government activities. And people prefer to online government models. Social distance will be the new mantra of today, and the role of communication in combating the COVID-19 pandemic impact. And the promote of sustainability of government success. And while people from all over the world are actively trying to avoid the crowd, they will also prefer internet-based activities, smart trends, and communications. In this case, there will be one question, and this is what will happen in the long run. In this conference, while we try to seek answer for this question, we also talk about smart trends on computing and communications and related issues, such as human resources management, policy and planning, economy, education, smart cities, and etc. In this session, we will be talking about some solutions, challenges, issues. And at least we named this Smart Trends on Communications. I would like to introduce the speakers. The first presentation is entitled with a comprehensive review on text to Indian Sign Language translation systems. And this presentation is by Rishabh Shadi. And the second presentation is entitled with a conceptual enhancement of LCTM using knowledge distillation for hate speech detection. And this paper is presented by Akalenk Insak. Third presentation is entitled with Deep Learning Techniques for Automated Image Captioning. This is presented by Siddharth Sirvasatawa. Fourth presentation is entitled with Cost Effectiveness of a Substance Abuse Prevention Program in Tribal Areas of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. This is presented by Gauri H. Fifth presentation is entitled with a study on impact of WhatsApp on college students. This is presented by Deepali A. Mahaji. I'm so sorry for my pronunciation if I am wrong. The sixth presentation is entitled with Assistive Autonomous Electric Vehicle for Disaster Management. This is presented by Saksham Gupta. There will be 6 speeches, and each speaker will have about 15 minutes for each presentation, 12 minutes for presentation, and 3 minutes for question and answer. Okay, let's start the presentation. The first presentation is Rishabh Shadi, sir. Yes, you can start.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, surely.
Yeah, give me a second, I'll just share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we can begin, right?
Right.
Yeah. Greetings to the distinguished members of the research community. I, Rishabh Shetty, a part of 5th SmartCom conference, proudly present my work titled...
Rishabh, sorry to interrupt you, but your screen is not sharing right now.
Okay.
You can just stop share and share it again.
Okay, I'll just have a look at it. Yeah, can you see it now?
Perfect, go ahead.
Yeah. So my topic is a comprehensive review on text to Indian Sign Language translation systems. My co-authors include Sanket Rathi and Kashish Shah. We are the students of NMIMS University, Mumbai, pursuing computer engineering. and we are doing it under the guidance of Professor Kamal Mistry. So I'll just give you a brief background of our target community, that is the Indian community from the deaf and dumb background. So language is a primary means of communication and acts as a tool to express greater ideas and emotions. Like when we can see right now, even I'm communicating with the help of speech, but not everyone is privileged like we are. And there are some communities that fall back when it comes to communication, because not everyone understands sign languages. World Health Organization did a survey which showed that 5.3% of the world population are currently suffering from hearing loss and disabilities. There are many research that is being carried out in order to help these communities and build a communication gap between the two communities, but there's no significant work that has been observed so far. So what we have done is we are doing a review of all the systems that have been developed so far, and providing a comprehensive suggestions on how these systems can be improved. The objective of our paper is to provide a comprehensive review on different approaches followed by various authors, and considering their pros and cons of these systems, and basically build a better system that has all the pros and trying to neglect the cons of the system. So before we go ahead, let's have a quick view on the ISL grammar. Like we know, every language has its own grammar rules, let it be English, Spanish, XYZ. So likewise, Indian Sign Language has its own grammar rules. Some of them are as follows. Numbers are depicted with the help of sign gestures. Sign representations are preceded by the gender of the person, male or female. The WH questions are placed at the end of the sentence. ISL also has a way of structuring the sentence very different from that of English grammar. And also, like we can see, Indian Sign Languages do not have prepositions or all of that. All these things are basically avoided in order to make it more convenient for the communication. The hierarchy of Indian Sign Language is something like this. So like you can see, Indian Sign Languages are divided into three parts: one-handed, non-manual, and two-handed. So one-handed sign language is basically something that that is depicted with the help of a single hand, which is further divided into static and movement. We can see further divisions such as manual and non-manual. Non-manual features are something like expressions, lip movements, XYZ. Similarly, two-handed sign languages are basically that make use of two hands. There are two different types, type 0 and type 1. Type 1 is basically that makes use of it makes use of two hands, whereas the type 1 makes use of one hand more than the other one. Method of approaches basically followed in these systems, or whatever can be followed. So there are three method of approaches that can be followed. One is direct translation systems. So what happens in direct translation system is the source text is directly translated to the target text. So let's say if I say a sentence that is directly depicted in sign language, which is very wrong because English has its own grammar rules as compared to Indian Sign Language. Further, we see direct translation, transfer-based translation system, wherein there are grammar rules that are applied. There is syntactic transformation that takes place of a sentence. So all the verbs and XYZ are handled and taken care of with respect to the target language that we are looking for. And similarly, there is a third kind of translation, that is interlingual translation, that basically converts a source text into intermediate language, and this intermediate language is then converted into a target language, that is Indian Sign Language in our case. So a quick go through of the existing systems. Most of these systems have one thing in common, as in they have an input module. These input modules are used to take the input from the user, pre-processing module that pre-processes these inputs and helps us better analyze them. A parser that transforms this language from English to ISL, and sign annotators that are basically helped in order to annotate the Indian Sign Language with the help of an animator. So these are the systems. Sardos is a system that is developed for American Sign Language with the help of interlingual translation. Although the main advantage of the system that was seen is that if a word is missing in the ASL dictionary, the same word is being depicted with the help of alphabets. Let's say my name Rishabh, it does not obviously exist in the dictionary, so it will be represented with the help of the letters. Although the database of the system was quite limited, we have other systems such as TEAM that also was for American Sign Language. Another disadvantage is that it had a limited data set. Ignite is a system that was developed for Indian Sign Language, although it was developed for only a specific domain like the Indian Railways, and had a small database as compared to what the Indian Sign Language should support. So it had a support for 90 words of the vocabulary that are generally used in a railway system. TESSA is a system that was developed for British Sign Language. This again was domain specific and had lack with respect to the animation module. The animations were not that clear as they were supposed to be, and the system was a bit good in terms of user friendliness. Again, the system was developed for a post office environment. So this was again limited to a certain environment and not a very robust system that it should have been. So VisiCast is basically a system that was developed for English to British Sign Language. The system also had its pros and cons, like they had good human virtual avatar that was easily understandable by the user. Another system that was domain bounded English to Indian Sign Language model. So in this system, they had a detailed approach that was followed in order to pass the sentences. This again, although it was detailed, but it lacked somewhere, that is, it was again domain restricted, as in railway, only restricted to the railways. Another system that we came across was the Indian Sign Language with the help of LOTS notations. So this system that was developed had a very detailed approach for converting the grammar from English Sign Language, English text to Indian Sign Language. And they had even looked up on how to make the system very user friendly. So let's say if there are two words, I, and the next word that it has to depict is am. So the transition between two words of the sign language was very smooth. So this made it very user friendly and made it look more natural as compared to the other systems that were developed that looked very rigged. So now let's have a look in general about how the systems were developed and how we can further enhance these systems. Although a lot of research has been carried out in order to support people with such conditions, no significant work has been done with respect to Indian Sign Language. Zardos was a system that was efficient but lacked to identify words that have different meaning. So what this says is, let's say there are two words, airplane and a normal plane. Okay. So let's say the dictionary only supported the word airplane and not the word plane. So these two words, although have the same meaning, they are not both these words are not supported by the system. Teams can be used for divergence between English to American Sign Language. With the help of LOTS notation, it looked more user friendly. This is a technique that we can help and use in order to develop our next system. Algorithms are based on unsupervised and semi-supervised learning approaches. These areas can be more further explored and have a better understanding of Indian Sign Language and how things can be developed. Yeah, future scope, like we can see, despite the developments in modern communication technologies, there's not enough work done on Indian Sign Language. Major of the work has been done on American Sign Language or British Sign Language. Due to this lack of development, there is a need of developing a robust system which can help us make a system that can be used for all the use cases. although the Indian Sign Languages hardly has a database or a dictionary of 1,000 words, we can develop a system that is robust in nature and can support multiple words and even translate it if the word is not supported in the dictionary. So these are the some references that we had taken in for our paper. Yeah, I guess that is it.
Thanks, Dr. Shadi, for your insights. Very timing, I should say this. Can any question to Dr. Shadi for his presentation? Yes.
I think so. There is a no question. So we have an open chat box. If any particular author have any question, you can directly write it down to the concerned author or the chair also.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. If you have any question, you can ask to Rishabh. Otherwise, we can go ahead with the next presentation.
Okay, maybe I can ask a question to Dr. Shadi. Do you have any obstacle when you were doing research, sir?
Obstacle as in we didn't have any obstacle, but more of the systems that were developed were with respect to American Sign Language or British Sign Language. There were not many systems that were developed for Indian Sign Language. Also, there was not proper data set that is available in order to develop such systems. These databases have to be developed from scratch. So as in we'll have to make a proper database in order to support these 1,000 words that are there in the Indian Sign Language Dictionary. So we'll have to develop a system that can support these and like depict these Indian Sign Languages.
Okay, many thanks, sir. Maybe we can pass another presentation. Okay, the second presentation by Aklank Isak. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Can we start?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my screen.
Okay.
Let me know when you can see my screen. Just a moment.
Yes, I saw your screen, sir.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it visible enough, or let me just put it?
Yes. Yes, sir, you can start.
All right. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone from wherever you are. My name is Isaac Akileng from Delhi Technological University. My research paper is entitled The Conceptual Enhancement of LSTM Using Knowledge Distillation for Hate Speech Detection. The co-author for this paper is Dr. Harun Abaj, who is an associate professor here at Delhi Technological, who also happens to be my supervisor in this case. So for this presentation, I will go through some of these bulletins. And the findings of this research is mainly to show how LSTM can be enhanced using knowledge distillation. There's a concept of knowledge distillation. And specifically, we're doing this for hate speech detection. Also, we did a comparison between different modules, like the teacher, student, and then another student module that we trained from scratch, using accuracy as a performance measure to see which one performs best in hate speech detection. In the subsequent slides, you will see that the student module that is trained from the teacher actually performs much better than all the other modules. So if you ask yourself, what is hate speech? So we say hate speech by definition is any form of speech, whether it is written or verbally, that attacks a person or group of persons and is intended to incite violence to these persons. We regard that as hate speech. Then why hate speech detection? Now, with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen so many of the activities have shifted from the physical to actually online, including even our conference today. And this has actually increased the use of different online platforms and social media platforms. And this has also increased the hate speech in different ways. So this has actually necessitated for us to actually do more research in hate speech detection. Now, the main concept for this research, which is knowledge distillation, by definition, is a way of distilling or transferring knowledge from a large neural network into a smaller network. Now, in most of my presentation, you will hear me say a lot about the teacher module and the student module. The teacher module, I will be referring to a large neural network, and then the student is the smaller network. So this concept of knowledge distillation uses what we call the temperature, like any other distillation process, where you try to heat and maybe get rid of all the impurities or the unnecessary information that is not needed. The same concept is applied in knowledge distillation. So a small illustration of how the teacher and student module would look like. You'd have a large neural network that you call the teacher module. And then you have the student module. And in between this, you do your knowledge transfer. Now the aim is to try and get the final output of the teacher module and then use that to train your module. We do this because we want to try to reduce the resources that are used by neural networks in terms of training them, the time it takes to train a neural network, the computation power that it takes. We want to try and narrow down all these resources. So that's why this concept is actually there. So in our proposed methodology, the dataset that we actually used is a publicly available dataset that had about 686 tweets. As I mentioned before, one of the challenges about neural networks is the time it takes to train them. So we had to get a slightly smaller dataset. Otherwise, this could actually affect us when it comes to training the networks. And then the type of knowledge that is actually used here, we decided to go with the response-based knowledge, where we focus on the output of the teacher module. So we try to mimic that final output of the teacher, and we use it for training the student module. Now, there's another concept of offline distillation, whereby we first train the teacher module, and then after we have trained the teacher module, we use the information that the teacher has to train the student. It's similar to the way you can have a teacher in class and you have a student, and then the teacher is transferring the knowledge or teaching the student. This is the same approach that is here. So our step-by-step process that we have is we first train the teacher module. So it's a matter of creating a large neural network, LSTM network, and then we go ahead and distill that knowledge or train the student module based on the teacher. But before we do that, we create another version, what we call a clone of the student, and then train also that from scratch. Now, instead of using the teacher module to train the student, we train it from scratch, and then we compare these two and see which one performs much better. The one that was trained by the teacher or the one that was trained from scratch. So a pictorial illustration of our module would be something like this. So we have the first step is to create the teacher module. Then we go ahead and create the student. Then we prepare the data that we are going to use for actually training the different modules. So we import our data, we pre-process it, and these are the tweets that actually we that we got. So the pre-processing has a lot of processes that go in, like removing the white spaces, removing the hashtags and everything like. Then we go ahead and split the data into two. We split it into the training and the testing data. So after that, we go ahead and train the teacher module. When training is done, we go ahead and distill the teacher module and train the student module based on the teacher. And then after, train another student module from scratch, and then we can compare the results. So after this implementation, the results that we actually got was something like this. From the concept of neural networks, you find that there is what we call an activation function. Now, the activation functions help determine which neuron is activated at what point. For this case of the LSTM, we're using the softmax. Now, the softmax, when you use the concept of knowledge distillation, introduces another parameter that is called the temperature that helps to actually remove the unnecessary information. So we performed some experiments with different values of the temperature. At a temperature of 3, 5, 7, and 9, we obtained the different accuracies as shown here. So you can see that the distilled module most times performs much better than the student module that is trained from scratch. And in some cases, you can find that the distilled student even performs much better than the teacher. This is something that could actually happen in real life. There are scenarios where you can teach someone and they actually become much better than you, or they become much better than the other students who actually learn on their own. So after these experiments, the conclusions that we drew from this is that the more you increase the temperature, the better the distribution, and this will help you get much better results. And like I mentioned, that distilling a student from the teacher actually performs much better than when the student is actually trained from scratch, and even sometimes better than the teacher. As we've seen in the previous slide, the different values that were obtained. We had a specific one where the student module, the teacher had an accuracy of 82, the student had 76, and the trained from scratch had a 75.4. So these are some of the references that we used for our research.
Okay. You're welcome, Mr. Isak. It is very fruitful presentation for me, and I think most participants can think as me. Let's continue another participant's presentation, and this presentation is by Siddharth Srivastava. Are you here, sir?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Yes, we are listening to you.
All right, I'll just share my screen. Let me know if it's visible. Is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm Siddharth Srivastava, and on behalf of our group at Maharashtra Institute of Technology, my co-authors Yash Chaudhary, Yash Damani, and Dr. Parul Jadhav, I'll be talking about automatic image captioning and how neural networks and all different kinds of deep learning techniques can help and push the state of the art. So just to introduce what we'll be covering here, we'll be covering 3 major paradigms of deep learning, and I'll be just describing what the image captioning task is. And we'll go through all the 3 paradigms and we'll talk about which one is the best. So to introduce what image captioning is, it basically is exactly what it sounds like. you have a boundary of pixels, you have an image, and what you're looking to do is pass it through some form of neural network and get a natural language description out of it. So you can see a couple of examples here where I've passed two sample images and the algorithm has successfully labeled them or captioned them. So it's a very interesting task because it concerns two modalities and two vastly different research communities. One is the computer vision research community, and the other is the natural language processing community. So the primary task here is to understand the visual information present in the image and also to present some natural language description of it. To go even a step further, just looking at the image is not enough. You need to have a visual attention mechanism to focus on what exactly you're trying to label. So there's an element of semantic understanding there. And of course, you need to communicate it in proper natural language description. So to formulate the problem in the deep learning way, since there are multiple modalities present, which is visual as well as natural language, the task is a little dicey than a usual vanilla neural network. So what we do is we get image and corresponding captions as training data. And I'll be talking about the data set in a little while, but we basically do what we do in stable machine learning and we try to learn from this data set. So a pictorial representation of this is just you have a convolutional neural network, which is one of the most famous algorithms to do computer vision tasks. And you have a recurrent neural network, which is one of the most famous algorithms for language tasks. And you make them into sort of an encoder decoder framework. And the CNN, as I'm sure a lot of people here know, they'll extract features from the images and create an embedding vector. And this embedding vector will go inside the recurrent neural network, which turns these features into natural language descriptions. So to go into the detail of what the encoder decoder framework is, this was introduced by Oriol Vinyals and his team at Google. And this was basically inspired by the neural translation mechanism that was very hefty at that time. So as I mentioned, a convolutional neural network is used as an encoder to convert the image to feature vectors. And a recurrent neural network is the decoder, which takes this feature vector and generates a caption. So we specifically use long short-term memory networks, which are LSTMs. They're a unique form of recurrent neural networks. And the reason why we make this choice is simply because there are vanishing and exploding gradients problems with RNNs. So you need to go a step ahead and use LSTMs instead, which have specific gating mechanisms that prevents these problems. So the optimization metric here is basically what we're trying to do is to maximize the likelihood of a target sequence of words, which comes from a predefined dictionary. So you supply images and a corresponding dictionary of whatever the caption is, and you're trying to maximize the likelihood that conditioned on the image, given some image, what will be the perfect target sequence of words. So that is the entire task there. So this is the architecture of it. You have a convolutional neural network that takes as input an image. It creates an embedding out of it, and that embedding, that vector goes into the LSTM. And this LSTM in turn uses a linear network towards the end of it and supplies a natural language description that is hopefully accurate, an accurate depiction of what the image is representing. So the second paradigm would be neuroevolution. And these are inspired by the evolutionary algorithms or genetic algorithms. The most revolutionary paradigm here was the neuroevolution algorithm, which was introduced by Kenneth Stanley at University of Central Florida. So what happens here is the neural networks themselves evolve over time. So the topology keeps evolving. As I'm sure you're aware, the topology of neural network is not a set configuration. You need to experiment with what works. You need to see which one gives you the best accuracy. So neuroevolution and genetic algorithms keep evolving the neural network till according to a specific metric, which is a fitness function in genetic algorithms, you achieve the highest fitness there, and that one is hopefully the best answer for you. So the algorithm is called NEAT, which is Neural Evolution of Augmented Topologies. Pretty self-explanatory, self-evolving topologies of neural networks. And what we'll be talking about specifically is CoDeep NEAT. So the extension of NEAT is CoDeep NEAT, where I'll just explain how CoDeep NEAT differs by NEAT. So if you see here, this is what a generic genetic algorithm looks like. You have a selection of parents. According to some fitness structure, you take out candidates, you mutate them again, and these are the candidate architectures. So usually this is the topology. In CodeEat-NEAT, it's not only the topology, but it's also the network hyperparameters of the neural network. So you evolve the topology as well as the hyperparameters of the network, and hopefully you get to maximize the fitness, and that one will be the best network out of it. The last paradigm here is attention-guided mechanisms. Recently, a lot of surge in deep learning has been because of attention mechanisms. So this is basically a purely adjunct form of mechanism. We go with the simple encoder decoder, but we incorporate the attention mechanism as an adjunct part of it. So what usually happens with attention is the generation of the sentences that are coming out of the decoder network. They're conditioned on the hidden states that in this case are determined through attention-based methods. And I'll describe a couple of them ahead. But here the decoder focuses on particular aspects of the input image instead of looking at the entire image at once. So we have a context vector, which is basically a representation of all the important points, all the important image regions. And we use this context vector in two forms. Number one is to use a deterministic soft attention, where you're taking the expectation over this context vector. And what happens in soft attention is you attend to all of the locations in the images, you combine these visual features, and then you subsequently get a context vector and generate a word out of it. So here's the mathematical representation of it. You're looking at all locations, which is represented by k, at all time steps, which is I, and you get the context vector out of it. The second way to do this is using stochastic hard attention, where you're not taking an expectation over the context vector, but you're sampling each location at each time step. So if considering the same nomenclature, you take the location k at time step I, the formula differs just by this b variable here, which is a parameterized multi-newly distribution. And the way to determine that is by sampling. So to compare them finally, so we'll be using 3 metrics to see which one of them is the best. And all of this evaluation has been done on the MS COCO dataset. So the first metric is called BLUE, which is used to compare variable length sentences. And these are just with a human written reference. And this is evaluated in the way of n-grams. And using n-grams, we calculate the closeness. The next metric is CIDR, which is based again on human consensus. And it evaluates the quality of the description of whatever caption is generated. And in this case, the metric basically measures the closeness of any sentence, candidate sentence, and the caption with multiple human written ground truth sentences. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty expensive and intensive metric. So we don't usually use this a lot. And the last metric here is Meteor, which is found out by calculating a score, which is based on some form of matching. And this matching is done between the generated caption and some reference sentence. So these are the qualitative results here. On the left-hand side, you can see an accurate representation of what we were trying to do. There's an image of a train, and the algorithm correctly classifies it as a train on a train track with trees in the background. So this is pretty accurate. However, on the right-hand side, if you see, the algorithm is not that good. It says a woman is sitting at a table with cake. However, there is no cake. So the most probable mistake here is in the convolutional neural network, because it identified a cake where there was none. So the quantitative results here are as follows. And ED is the encoder decoder frameworks, NE is the neuroevolution, and ATT are the attention frameworks. As you can see, the Vinyals model basically performs well in all the metrics. So their BLUE score is high, their Meteor score is high, their CIDR score is high as well. So this has been observed in the literature very largely, that the encoder decoder frameworks, albeit they're simple, and they're computationally intensive as well. But since they're not as intensive as neuroevolution and attention-based algorithms, they perform very well. So to conclude, I'd like to point out some future directions of where image captioning is going. Transformers have been taking deep learning by a storm. So a very useful advantage of transformers is that you can get rid of the entire encoder decoder and you can streamline the process by just using a single transformer. So this kind of a technique was not possible even a year ago. Another important direction is the scaling laws of neural networks. Basically understand what the trade-off is between image caption pairs and how the scaling laws between neural networks work, so that you understand how much data you require for a good algorithm. And last but not the least, perhaps the most important in my opinion, is the unsupervised learning direction and few shots learning direction in image captioning. And the major motivator here is image caption pairs are very expensive to obtain. You have to collect images and you have to manually label them. So this is not a viable strategy in the long run. So it makes sense to go for some sort of an unsupervised approach where you don't have to label these images yourself. Or at least if you're doing it, it should be a few shots learning based approach where you don't need 2 million or 300 million sort of examples. So these are all the references and you can find more of them in our paper. And that'll be it from our side. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to take it. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. If you any question to Mr. Srivastava, and also as I remember, I forgot Professor Isaac presentation. Can you have a question to Professor Isaac also? Yes, I checked the chat box also. We haven't any question. Okay, maybe we can start with the fourth presentation. And thanks for your insights, Professor Srivastava. The fourth presentation is presented by Gauri H. Are you here, ma'am?
Ma'am, I'm here.
Yes, I am here. Can you start?
Yes, ma'am, I will share the screen now.
Okay, many thanks.
Ma'am, is it visible?
Yes, I see your presentation.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gauri H, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in mathematics from Amrita University. And first of all, let me thank SmartCom 2021 for giving me this prestigious platform to present my paper. And about my paper, it's cost effectiveness of a substance abuse prevention program in tribal areas of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. I have got 4 other co-authors. We are all from Amrita University. And our paper is based on Amrita Awareness Ambassador Program. We have collected data from the program and analyzed it. So about Amrita Awareness Ambassador Program, or in short, AAA program, it trains local youth in tribal area to act as ambassadors to help prevent substance abuse, human trafficking, and to create health awareness. The AAA program is currently active in 13 states of India. The program is supported by the Indian Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Now, for the program, 15 schools were selected from Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. These two are 2 states of India. And there will be minimum 10 ambassadors from each schools. The ambassadors are trained by the coordinators and teachers so that they could interact with school classes and conduct sessions such as presentations and school plays. Since the initiation of the AAA program, students have become aware of the impact of the drugs, and by making them members of AAA, they have recognized their duty of not engaging in this practice of using drugs and also to minimize the drug abuse. So thereby, we have lowered the rate of drug use among tribal students. The program is also expected to raise the self-esteem of both the ambassadors and the participating students. So we have focused our study area in the tribal areas of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. So we can see a glimpse about the tribal areas of these 2 states of India. The main source of income in the tribal areas of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand is agriculture. Many villagers from these states use maha flour and rice for brewing alcohol at home. Children and women help in collecting and selling this flour, as this acts as a passive income for them. So this is the main reason for the frequent absence of school students from classes, early dropout issues, and early alcohol use in adolescence. Now, AAA program was initiated in these areas to spread the awareness of social problems and the impacts of drug usage among tribal students. Now we can see the study area for the analysis. 609 students from 15 tribal villages from the states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh participated in the AAA program. They completed a pre-survey before the start of program and post-survey 6 months after the start of the program. The minimum and maximum ages of students participated in the survey were 9 and 18 respectively. 50.2 of the total student population were boys, and the main result of the survey was defined as answering more than half of the knowledge questions correctly, and it was estimated as 52.3 of the total student population for the pre-survey. And the effectiveness of the program is seen when additional students who didn't answer correctly half the questions during the pre-survey were able to do so in the post-survey, which was conducted 6 months after the pre-survey. Now, costs were obtained for conducting all the 15 programs, and this cost in terms of INR, Indian currency, was split into 8 components, such as cost of teaching materials, cost of renting rooms for teaching, and so on. Let's discuss the methods we have used in the paper. Cost of components of conducting the AAA program were approximately log-normally distributed. It's because cost cannot be negative, so we have used log-normal distribution here. And the method by Van et al. Was used to estimate parameters of the distribution. Like we have calculated mean and standard deviation using the method by Van et al. Logistic mixed effect regression models were used to estimate the effectiveness of the program in different age and gender strata. And here we have used a mixed effect model because we have the dependent variable here as a binomial component. So we have used the mixed effect model rather than the linear model. And for that, the random effects were used for villages and regions. Effectiveness is expressed as a conditional probability that a student who didn't pass in the pre-survey passed in the post-survey. And to find the percentage of students in each strata, the data from 2011 Census India was used. And the cost effectiveness ratio was used to find the overall estimates of cost and effects. The cost effectiveness acceptability curve was used to express the uncertainties in estimates of cost effectiveness. The dependency of the results on the different components of cost was visualized using a tornado plot. This was used for sensitivity analysis. We have used a tornado plot for the sensitivity analysis. So these are some of our results. So table 1, it shows the estimated means and 95% prediction intervals of the cost components in INR per program. The components were travel, teachers, other teaching materials, reporting and monitoring, renting a classroom, trophies and certificate, teacher laptop projector and Wi-Fi, consumables. We have calculated the 95% prediction intervals and also the means. It's all in INR. And in here, we have table 2. It's the strata for gender, age, population size, percentage in the study area. We have got all these numbers from the 2011 Indian census. And we have calculated the estimates of effectiveness in each of the stratas. That is, we have calculated the prediction and standard errors of the estimate, and also the 95% prediction intervals of these estimates. We have also figured out a cost effectiveness acceptability curve with willingness to pay on the x-axis and probability to be cost effective on the y-axis. And we have got a pretty effective curve here. Also, we have done tornado plot for the sensitivity analysis for the cost components, for the 8 cost components, and we have got the desired result using the tornado plot. The discussion. We have already seen in table 1, it shows the estimated cost of various components of cost components for the program, and it was all in INR format. And table 2 shows the estimates of the conditional probability that a student who didn't answer the pre-survey correctly was able to do so in the post-survey, that they were able to answer it correctly. And the percentage of students who already answered the pre-survey was estimated as 52.3%. The cost effectiveness ratio was estimated as rupees 2,770. The cost effectiveness acceptability curve shows that the program is cost effective even for a long willingness to pay. We have seen it here. And the tornado plot shows that the results hold even under more pessimistic assumption on the model parameters. For the conclusion, the analysis estimates that for every rupees 2,770 spent on the program, an additional student who didn't possess awareness on substance abuse and health problems could obtain long-term knowledge on the issue through the Amrita Awareness Ambassador program. It should also be seen that this is the main thing. It should be seen that these estimates only look at the direct effect of students who actively participated on the program. The indirect effect is believed to have a much more impact on the tribal student community. So we can conclude by saying that EEE program is designed as a peer-to-peer program which creates awareness that eventually spreads through the community. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
You're welcome, ma'am. We listened another important presentation by you. Many thanks for your insights.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any participants to have a question to Guru H. ma'am? I checked the box. Okay, we haven't any question. Let's continue another speech, maybe. Fifth presentation is by Deepali E. Mahajan. Can you hear, ma'am?
Yes,
Are you
ma'am.
here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Am I
Okay.
audible?
Yes, please.
Yes, let me share my screen.
I can see your screen.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all. So, as I am Deepali Mahajan from Aurangabad, India, I am going to present my paper that is a study on impact of WhatsApp on college students, and my co-author is Dr. C. Namrata Mahinder. So in introduction, I can say that there is a boom in use of social networking sites. And as the mode of interaction has been changed, the traditional interaction mode has been now converted into the interaction, like by using the different social networking sites. And the people, different category of peoples are involved in this kind of communication, like the different social life, the different culture people, the peoples who are belonging from the different geographical areas also can participate in the communication by using such social networks websites. And people are graced with various cell phone applications, as these kind of applications are easily available on the cell phone, and the internet facility is also available on the cell phone. So it is very convenient mode of the communication itself. And because of all these kind of features, many people are severely dependent on the usage of such kind of applications for their daily activities. Now, when we have performed the studies, we found that the India is having the more users, like about the 340 million users over the world. Those are using the WhatsApp. Next to India, we are having the Brazil, and which is having the 99 million of the WhatsApp users. So this shows that whatever the use of WhatsApp social network is very much in the country, that is India. And it is because of the features which is introducing by the WhatsApp application. So it is simple, that is the reliable messaging that can be easily you can easily share the messaging within the groups. You can continuously you are having the conversation continuously. Again, whatever the what we can say, that it is much cost effective, because it is not using your call plans of your mobile. It is using only the internet connection. And as in the India, the internet connection is easily available, so it is more widely used in the India. Again, whatever the security issues are there, whatever the share your memories, like in the form of images, photographs, videos, you can share your memories with your friends and families. You can share the voice messages also, and easy documentation sharing. So this is one of the important feature, because before that, it is very difficult to share the PDF documents to images and videos. So very limited resources was there that can be used to share such kind of documents, but it is make easy while it is introduced by this WhatsApp. Again, for literature review, I have studied about the different researchers. Those have put their what we can say, their views. Now, few researchers are against the WhatsApp use and few researchers are in favor of the WhatsApp use. According to their studies, they have noticed about the impact of the WhatsApp. And as the result of that, the objective of our research is to study the use of WhatsApp among the students and to study the impact of WhatsApp on the college students, how the studies are affecting the students of the college. Again, to identify the addiction of the WhatsApp in case of the students. Now, for doing this particular study, we have proposed the method in that the data collection is there, in which we have implemented the cross-sectional design for this particular task. In that, we have we have used the self-generated original questionnaires, which includes the 32 items of multiple choice questions. And these questionnaires, we have taken the hard copies. We have distributed among the UG and PG students of the to collect their responses. So total participants we were found, that is the 98, which includes the UG and PG college as well as the university students. Now, questions has been drawn in English language because as India is rich of diversity, so the different community peoples are there, so the language may be a barrier. So English language is a common, so that we have preferred the English language for drawing the questionnaires. For analyzing the data, we have gone with the statistical package of the social science, that is the SPSS. As it is based on the statistical analysis, it discovers the powerful insights from the responses collected through the questionnaires. And we have computed the frequencies and the percentage from that questionnaires. And we use all these kind of scales for the questions, like the nominal scale, ordinal scale, and the scale. So these are the three different types of scales we can use in the SPSS, which can be help us for the statistical analysis. So from the 32 items here in this particular study, we have concentrated on these 7 questions only, as we are trying to find the addiction and the impact of the WhatsApp on the study of the students. So specific 7 questions we have selected over here only for the study. And in terms of for all 7 questions, we have computed such tables like which shows the frequency and the percentage of for every question. And against that, we found that the result we have that 71% students using the WhatsApp from 1 to 5 years, means the long duration of using this particular application. Secondly, we found that most of the students are using this for chatting rather than posting the own messages. Again, we found that students feel excited and happy while they are using the WhatsApp. The next, we found that 64.4% students saying that they are not getting irritated if we are not allowed to access the WhatsApp for a day to the students. This is a very positive result we got from here. And the next, we can say that moderate use we have found here, as the 68.5% students are using WhatsApp only for 2 hours a day, and only 1% student are using the WhatsApp more than 6 hours for a day. So it indicates that whatever the WhatsApp use is there, that is the moderate use of the WhatsApp we found. Again, only the 50% students are there. They are preferring to check the WhatsApp early in the morning and before going to bed. That is, it shows, again, it is showing us the moderate use of the WhatsApp. And around all the questions, if we observe, so the use is moderate and it don't show the symptoms of the addiction. So no WhatsApp addiction is found in the college students in our study. Now, in the terms of shortcoming and future scope, we can see that a study is performed on the students of some specific number of institutions. So limited category of students has been taken in consideration. So we will expand the scope of the study. Secondly, we have only considered the UG and PG students for the survey. We will now consider the high school students also, as they are in the adolescent stage, and this is a very much sensitive towards the use of the SNS. Next, we have included 107 students for the study. From that, only 98 valid entries we got in the survey. We will increase the sample size for more precise results. And the last, we found in the current study, we have focused on the use of WhatsApp only, whereas we have to consider about the other social networking sites also, as not only WhatsApp, but like the Facebook, Snapchat, and Twitter. There are so many social networking sites are there, and they are so having their effect also we have to consider in the case of the students. So it is in our future scope that we are going to consider the other social network sites also. And at the end, I can conclude myself as the WhatsApp is a faster and appropriate way to communicate with the friends and family. So after analyzing the 98 UG and PG student, it is found that the spread of social networking site WhatsApp is useful and entertaining as they feel happy while using this application. It is found that the use of WhatsApp is more convenient way of the interaction. Again, the use of this social media is found moderate instead of our initial consideration of the excess use. Actually, we have started the research with the consideration that it is the excess use of the WhatsApp, and so that how it will be impact on the students. But in the research, we found that the moderate use of the WhatsApp. Next, we found that the students use this application to keep in touch with family, friends, relatives for sharing the information, and we don't found the WhatsApp addiction in the students' behavior. So these are the references which I have referred for the studies, and thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. Thanks for your insights. It is very fruitful presentation. Is there any question to dear presenter? Yes, I control the chat box. Okay. I have a question, ma'am.
Yes,
Maybe, yes, you know the Telegram.
yes.
Currently, we have many doubts in our minds about the reliability of WhatsApp. What do you think about the Telegram?
Actually, I didn't study about the Telegram because we are focusing on the WhatsApp and Facebook just now. So I didn't have any idea about the Telegram. As I specified in my future work that we are going to consider about the other social networks also. So we are going to consider about that particular application.
Okay, thanks, ma'am, for your kind answer. And now we are listening to last presentation, and this is the sixth presentation. This presented by Saksham Gupta. Are you here, sir?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. You can start if you are ready.
Yeah, give me a minute, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes, surely.
Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so I guess good afternoon, everyone. And for like whoever is from the East Coast, good evening. So topic for the day is assistive autonomous electric vehicle for disaster management. So I'm the first author, and co-author is actually my professor Kashyap Joshi from a university named NMIMS in Mumbai, India. So we have practically implemented this, and I'll go ahead with the presentation. So I'll directly go to the introduction. So basically, we have made a vehicle which can work in many different scenarios for maybe a disaster management robot or a calamity management, like pandemic management also, we can say. There are like many problems we face in a disaster. If there's a like disaster or a catastrophe, catastrophic situation, uh, we'll need huge manpower and huge resources to like check area surrounding, right? Or to just to scan it, so that we can like come to know that what was the impact factor of the disaster. For example, an earthquake. If an area is hit by an earthquake, there is a huge like there's a huge catastrophe or a huge problem going on around, and there are not many. We don't have many we don't have much of resources over there to like gather information. So what we do is we have um, we have made a vehicle which can like maneuver on different terrains, on different mm, on different terrains, and it works on the principle of uh, optical and lidar framework, and it is completely modular. Our vehicle is completely modular, so it can be like assembled into different forms according to the situation. So uh, we started off back in 2019 with a design. So the design is completely made from uh, aluminum profiles. uh, we chose aluminum profiles because we wanted a vehicle to like just be modular, so we can just snap it and like we are good to go. So we have tried to keep the center of gravity very low in this vehicle so that it won't topple. We have taken care of each and every dynamic unsprung masses, and kept the center of gravity as low as like it is near the wheelbase. So and for maneuvering, we are using a two-wheel drive. So there are two motors, 1.4 kilonewton DC motors, and they are both are geared motors, right? So we get a better torque at the start. So and we have a caster wheel behind to get a better maneuvering. And apart from that, sorry, apart from that, we have a sensor stand. As you can see, the two vertical sections over here are a sensor stand, which basically can hold a lidar and a stereoscopic camera, which we are using. Lidar, we have a 3D lidar, and a stereoscopic camera is by Tara XL. I'll go ahead with the part here. So electronic system design. Yeah. Yeah. So we are using we are using CAN protocol for communication, and there's a master slave configuration here. Uh, a master is basically NVIDIA Xavier, and slave over here is a custom. We have made an custom what we call custom microcontroller from Atmega 32U4, and basically we have made our own custom power distribution board, when which we have many auxiliary supplies of 12 and 5 to power them both, the master and the slave, and the peripheral devices too. Okay, so here we have input from camera. IMU is basically an inertial measurement unit. We are using IMU from Spartan, uh, and lidar. It, so all this is fed to the master, and slave only controls the motor and the switch. There are two switches we have. One is e kill, one is the physical kill. Kill is on the vehicle itself, and there's a e kill if in case there's like if like all the fail safes are not working, we'll have a last option of e kill or remote kill, we can say. That is via Zigbee. We are using Zigbee for that. We are also black boxing things, like we have a log of each and every thing that the vehicle is doing. So everything is logged, each and every data is logged, and we can just intercept that at any point of time, and it is encrypted. We can intercept using Wireshark or a custom protocol. We can also do it by JAWS, open JAWS, right? Apart from that, software architecture in this, okay, one second. Yeah, yeah. And this, basically, we are working on two inputs over here, two major inputs. Uh, Actually three, but two major inputs. One is depth map from camera and lidar sensors. We As we are using stereoscopic cameras, we get a depth map, right? So we know the distance ahead of us at. And the second data is basically a raw image which is converted to HSV, and which is again converted to a different format. uh, the lidar scan is then converted to a uh, basically we use a ROS package after that, in which which is converted to a laser scan. 3D scan is converted to a 2D scan, in which we find the object, and it then gets then it is fed to the lane detection pipeline, in which we find the lane. Okay, here we have a GPS data as well. If in case uh, the processor is not able to process camera and lidar data, we have a GPS. We have a provision for GPS coordinates. We can feed the GPS coordinates with a precision of like approximately 1 meter, and there's a smart buffer over here. So which can decide like which data to process at a given point of time. uh, After the smart buffer decides which data is to be processed, it is it is transmitted via CAN bus, and it is given to Arduino, and Arduino controls our motor. We have a fail-safe option if our CAN bus protocol is not working over here. So we have I2C backup communication with Arduino, which is again controlling our motor driver and controller. Uh, so this is basic overview of pathfinding. This is just a tip of the iceberg. There are a lot many ROS packages running behind it. uh, in simple terms, it is basically something like that. If you can see, like, if is the lane straight, yes. If yes, then is the object right? If no, then set PWM for right turn, which makes sense. If the object right, yes, set the PWM for left turn. Like this, we have many cases over here for obstacle avoiding and pathfinding. So yeah, due to robust design, there are like many advantages over here. Due to robust design, it can be used on various terrains. The vehicle can carry heavy loads. It can carry payload up to 40 kgs at any given point of time, and it can also carry resources. uh, if we are using it for military purpose, and there's a no man land where people cannot enter due to various protocols, then this can carry like 40 kgs of payload, maximum 40 kgs of payload. So it requires very less power, as it has only two motors. And due to use of camera and like sensors, it is completely autonomous, and we have many like backup options for to continue the autonomous operation of the vehicle. And due to the GPS, onboard GPS system, we can track the vehicle very easily. And uh, okay, one more thing I forgot to mention is our lidar operation. Basically, we have divided our lidar into two major section, 180 180, like out of the 360, because we get a 360 scan in lidar. Out of the 180, okay, from those two section, we have neglected one section and only considered one section of 180-degree, and we have divided that 180 into 10 parts, that is 18-degree each. So we exactly know that where the obstacle is in the like raw scan. And again, we are running ROS behind everything. So there is package for, we have taken care of each and everything that can go wrong. And
Sorry to interrupt you, Sakshan.
yeah,
You have last 1 minute for this.
okay. So applications, it can be used as a transportation vehicle in various warehouses. It can be used for surveillance, for disaster management, and it can, okay, there's one more addition to this now. Because of the pandemic, it can also be used in a COVID-19 situation to deliver various kind of uh, medicines or payloads. So yep. So I'm concluding over here. There were some various references which helped me a lot. Uh, are there any questions?
Many thanks, sir,
Yeah.
for your wonderful insights and sharing ideas. Can we have a question as participants?
Pardon?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I control the chat box. Okay. Thanks for your presentation, sir. I would like to summarize 7 presentations. Our first presentation was presented by Dr. Shadi, and in this paper, current computer sign language translators were considered, and their pros and cons were identified and discussed. The general approach followed by the systems were discussed also. A new approach for construction of sign languages was proposed. Second presentation is presented by Dr. Akılenk İshak, and in this presentation, it aims to provide a detailed process of improving LCTM used for hate speech detection using knowledge distillation. Third presentation is presented by Siddharth Srivastava, and in this paper, 3 primary distinct deep learning based approach to solve the problem are introduced and compared, and also encoder decoder frameworks, neural evolution, and attempt-based approach are determined. This paper covers their mechanisms and their performance and highlights. To conclude, the results of this approach on benchmark dataset and metrics are presented. For presentation is presented by Gauri H. and analyzes in this paper, it analyzes data from the program from 15 villages in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. 609 children from these areas participated in a survey. And the 5th presentation is presented by Dipali A. Mahajan, and in this paper, it tried to find the behavior of students toward the use of WhatsApp in their studies. The study conducted on the 98 college of the university students. 6th paper is presented by Saksham Gupta, and in this paper was tried to reveal the importance of electric vehicle for disaster management. I would like to thank all our participants for their presentation. Thanks to everyone who participates and show interest. I would like to express my endless gratitude to the organization team for this flawless conference. Our session is over. Many thanks and kind regards.
Great. I sincerely thank our authors for their excellent presentation, contribution in this session, and all our participants for being a part of this international conference. I hope this session was informative and knowledgeable as well. All the presenters would be getting their digital certificates through email within 2 working days. Further, all the papers have already forwarded to the Springer, and the publication will be live within 4 to 6 months. So kindly cooperate with the team of SmartCom 2021 as and when intimated. And I also want to thank our session chair, Dr. Gul, for chairing the session.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Yeah. A token of appreciation to the chair on the behalf of Team SmartCom 2021 and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. Thank you all for your valuable presence. And dear all, I kindly request you all to on the camera for a quick snapshot of the virtual conference. Okay. We should wait 30 seconds more.
Thank you, Dr. Gul, to chairing the session. Once again, thank you to all the presenters. As discussed with the Neelam, we will share each and every data within 2 working days. For more 1 minute, we can open this session. If you have any question, you can directly write it down to the chat box. And if you have any particular conference query, you can directly write it down to the support ID. Definitely, team will help you for the more. Once again, thank you, Dr. Gul. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Many thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, dear all. We are closing this session and we will start our next session as per the schedule. Technical session 2B at 4:45 p.m. Thank you.